Before the lunch break, we said that you know that you're on to something really good when each panel is better than the next. But boy, you know you've hit a home run when after lunch and people are tired, the buzz is higher than it was before lunch. So thank you all for joining us for lunch and for staying for the afternoon part of the program, which is going to be equally as wonderful as our morning part of the program. And we'll have an opportunity to do housekeeping items sort of throughout the afternoon, but a couple key items for those of you who want CLE. Don't forget that that needs to be turned in after the program. There'll be somebody out there to take your CLE form after the program. And of equal importance is there is a reception right outside after the program with wine and cheese, and it is Friday, so that we can continue on. Wine and cheese. And last but not least, you'll notice that there's a plate of brownies up here at the front of the room. And I've had the pleasure of working with Peggy, who I'm about to introduce in a moment, on her remarks. And I know that she is passionate about dialogue. So one way that I know that most of you are going to want to ask questions, in addition to the fact that you'll have questions to ask, is you get a brownie whenever you ask a question. So that's what that plate of brownies is doing up here. Okay, on with the show. This afternoon, in this first part of the presentation, we're going to talk about developing senior women leaders. And there's no one better to talk about that than Peggy Wolf. She is yet another example of a driven, highly accomplished graduate of this law school. A 1979 graduate, Peggy was the editor of the Law Review. He's on the, and editor, honesty above all. And editor of the Law Review, is on the visiting committee for this law school and is a member of the Society of Benchers. Peggy is one of the senior female leaders at Skadden Arps, where she is of counsel in the corporate practice group. And she focuses her practice on U.S. and international mergers and acquisitions for both public and private companies. In addition, Peggy is responsible for the development and implementation of Skadden's Global Partner Training Program. In this role, Peggy is uniquely qualified to speak to issues of leadership and how best to encourage partners to think more broadly and strategically about their responsibilities. Understanding that giving back to our communities is an important part of leadership, Peggy serves on the board of New York Presbyterian Hospital, which serves as a teaching hospital for both Columbia and Cornell medical schools, as well as she serves on the board of the John Hartford Foundation. These are but two examples of Peggy's broad community involvement. As we all look forward to her remarks, please join me in welcoming Peggy Wolf.
Thank you. That was incredibly nice. Laura began this morning by apologizing for using notes, and she had 75 minutes to talk. I only have 30. So I have no excuse, but I am, in fact, going to talk from notes, so I apologize for that. It is truly an honor to be here, particularly to be part of this inaugural event. I've been asked to speak about developing senior women leaders, as Anne said, and I'm going to take a little liberty with that and talk generally about my perspectives on developing women generally, if you will. And I've given this topic a lot of thought over the last several years since I'm responsible for our partner training program, as you heard. And leadership is a very important part of development to us at Skadden, and it's really fundamental to our program. And I would have thought that talking about leadership for me today would come easily. But I've figured out that today's conference is really less about what leadership is in the law firm context and why it's important, and really about how, as women today, we can stand out, we can succeed, and we can really make a difference. You've heard a lot about leadership. You've heard a lot about how women can become good strategic partners. You've also heard a fair amount about the challenges women could face. I was hoping that what I was going to say was going to be uniquely different, and I'm going to apologize in advance because I'm not sure it's entirely different. But as I was thinking about what I would try and say to make it less repetitive, someone said to me, "Oh, Peggy, make it personal. Personal stories are really compelling." And I thought, well, that's an interesting idea, but I'm not so sure my story is all that compelling, or will be to you. But in doing that, it did get me to reflect on how I survived and did manage to get a bit of success at Skadden Arps. And I want to begin by saying that I believe success has many definitions, and it would be really presumptive for me to tell all of you what success is for you. I think each one of us has to figure out what it is for ourselves and be very comfortable with that. Looking back at my path, I think it was a little unique. Like many young people graduating from law school, I wanted to be a litigator. In fact, I wanted to be a prosecutor. And so after my second year of law school, I was really lucky to get an internship at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District. And I was put in the drug unit, and I loved it. It was just fabulous. I was totally hooked, and that's what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. The only problem was they didn't take kids right out of law school. You needed to have 2 years of big law firm litigation experience. So my best opportunity in New York was at a relatively new law firm by the name of Skadden Arps. In 1979, Skadden Arps was an upstart. It was kind of a scrappy place. And to give you a tiny bit of perspective, I think I was about the 180th lawyer to join the firm. There were 2 offices, New York and Boston, and we only had a handful of practice areas. We were basically a corporate and litigation firm. We really did deals. Litigation serviced the corporate lawyers. We had a little tax. We had a little benefits. Today, we're over 1,800 lawyers. We're in 23 offices, and we claim to have 40 practice areas. I haven't gone back to the list to actually see, could there really be 40, but that's what we're claiming. My class was the first large one. I think there were about 10 of us. But what's interesting about it is half of us were women, which I really thought was unique in hindsight. And of course, there were absolutely no women partners. Frankly, I was not entirely sure that Skadden Arps was going to qualify as a big New York law firm for purposes of the Southern District. My first day at Skadden, like I'm sure all of you, began with an orientation session. And I spent my day listening to various things. And about halfway through the day, I was told I was going to be put in the corporate department. And right then and there, I stopped listening. I was convinced my career was over, that I didn't know what I was going to do. And of course, I was so happy to have a job in New York that I didn't want to rock the boat. But I actually did get the courage up to say, gee, how did this happen? And I can report that in typical Skadden Arps fashion, very definitively, I was told by the head of the corporate department that they had looked at what I studied in law school, that they had looked at what I had done during the summer, they had looked at my interests, and they knew I was a corporate lawyer. And of course, they were wrong. In fact, what they had done, and I do find it somewhat amusing because we were quite small back then, was confuse me with the woman who was starting the next week. She, in fact, was the corporate lawyer, and I was the litigator. I sort of tested the water in terms of saying, gee, I'm really the litigator. Could I do some litigation? And I was told no. They said, we're desperate. We need you to spend at least 6 weeks in the corporate department. And I figured for 6 weeks, I can tough this out. I said, you can't fire me. I never took securities laws. I hated corporate law. I nearly flunked out of corporate tax, so you're going to have to be nice to me. That mistake, or as I like to refer to it now, that little bit of luck, is actually what made the difference in my career and my being a part of our mergers and acquisitions department in the New York office today. 7.5 years later, I did become one of our earliest women partners. And over time, I did have the opportunity to serve in the management of the firm. I sat on our partner selection committee, and I did sit on our policy committee, which is our governing body. So, how did this all happen? I mentioned luck, and I think someone else this morning actually talked a little bit of luck. I actually don't underestimate the role that luck has in someone's career. I was lucky enough to arrive at the firm during a time of tremendous expansion. I was actually lucky enough to be put in the corporate department because honestly, I think knowing what type of litigation Skadden Arps did back then, I don't think I would have been particularly happy for those 2 years that I would have had to stay there. And I have to say I was absolutely fascinated by the work, and we certainly had loads of it back then. As probably all of you know, the world of mergers and acquisitions, not unlike the corporate world, and certainly not unlike the financial services world, is largely male-dominated. We saw Laura's numbers this morning that actually prove that. And certainly on the M&A side, it, at least for me, was quite aggressive. So why did I stick with it and succeed rather than what I thought was going to be my dream? Back then, as you all know, there were no role models, nor was there much talk about hostile work environments, and there certainly weren't any efforts to promote women. I honestly believe that my success, in large part, was frankly showing up every day, loving my work, and being willing to work as hard as we did. I absolutely loved the challenge. Now, there are some people who say, oh, come on, Peggy, be honest with yourself. You were petrified, and it was fear that drove you to do what you did. And there may actually be some truth to that. Whatever the background is, I was really passionate about what I was doing. I also enjoyed and really respected the people that I worked with. The firm was small. We all knew each other back then, and we helped each other. We worked together in the name of the firm. It really was our culture back then. It wasn't about individual success. It was about ensuring that the firm was successful, because we knew if the firm was successful, then we were all going to be successful. And also because it was a period of tremendous growth for the firm, we knew that if we worked really hard, and I mean really hard, and stuck it out, the likelihood was that in 7.5 or 8 years, we would become partners. Unfortunately, I think the world has changed a good bit today. I think it's quite a different place. And I also think the law firm model is changing. I think it's changing slowly, but I do think it's changing, and it's going to have to change more. I believe that in this context, there's a few prerequisites that should guide us all in whatever we do. First, I talked about passion, and I believe, and I think, again, someone said this morning, that it's important that you're passionate about whatever you're doing. If you get up every morning and you just go to a job, then you're not doing the right thing. And I know for sure, and I don't know too many things for sure, but I know that life is too short to just do that. Success, however you all choose to define it, probably is the result of some other lessons that I believe revolve around 4 primary things. At least they did for me. First, and we talked a little bit about this, you have to choose how you present yourself. Second, your relationships with your colleagues and your clients. Third, taking risks, another topic we touched on. And fourth, I believe humor has to enter into everything you do. And let me take a minute and talk about each of these. Working in a male-dominated environment, I believe, presents its challenges. My experience is that there's an awful lot of ego, that there's and David, forgive me for saying this. You were there with us back then. There's a lot of ego, there's a lot of posturing, and certainly in my world there was an enormous amount of sports, or what seemed to me to be an enormous amount. I mean, I kept thinking, gosh, if we spent more time billing and less talking about sports, we could all retire, but there was a lot of sports. I was very lucky as a young associate at Skadden because there was so much work that it didn't really matter whether you were male or female. If you were prepared to work hard and you had a modest amount of good judgment, you got as much responsibility as you could handle. The good work was really, really plentiful, and it was handed out to anybody that had time. That being said, for me, it took a very long time to be comfortable with myself and how to get things done and done efficiently in a very male-centric world. And as I was thinking about this today, one small story, I remember I had just become a partner, and we had worked very hard on a large deal that we had just signed up. And the law firm on the other side, which will remain nameless, was another very big New York deal law firm. And I got a call the next day from the junior partner, and he said to me, "Peggy, we have a mistake, we have to fix it." And I said to him, "Hey, Joe, what's the mistake?" Now, we have a mistake, okay, we. He said, well, and I, as I recall, it had something to do with the employee benefits section. And I said, but we just signed this up. We've spent months working on this. What do I tell my client? And he said to me, "Oh, Peggy, stop being a girl. Just get it fixed." And that story just lives with me because I so desperately wanted to say what you could imagine I wanted to say. And I wanted to go back to my client and say, "This is outrageous. I'm never going to get this fixed." Excuse me. The client was great, and actually we did manage to fix it, which, discretion being the better part of valor, was obviously the right thing to do. But again, it seemed to me over time that, and I guess it's true today, women have two choices. And as I said, I don't think it's really changed. We can be aggressive in the same manner that men can be. And if we're aggressive, we're obviously considered difficult or far worse. If we're not aggressive, then we're generally criticized as being too deferential, or we can be criticized as actually not being up to the task. And I think it takes time to figure out what the right path is in any given situation. And there are still days when I show up and I find myself in a situation and I find it very hard because my immediate reaction is to get mad. And you just have to step back and figure out what your goal is and how you're going to get it done. And I find that you just have to conform your behavior to the best way to deal with the people you're dealing with and really just focus on what the task is. And I'll admit, it's not easy. I think ultimately, no matter what path you choose, you have to be comfortable with yourself. You have to be true to yourself. And you have to behave in a manner that works for you, but also engenders the respect and trust of the people you work with. And everybody does it differently, but I think our goal has to be that. You really want to build a relationship of trust with those that are looking to you. And that brings me to my next point, which is building those relationships and how you do it. And I think it's not only relationships of trust with your team and your colleagues. I think it's critical you have to build relationships of trust with your clients. And I know that not all of you are with outside firms, but many of you are inside. And the way I look at it is you all have clients at the company as well. So I think it does apply to you generally. What I'm finding is that these relationships, I believe, are equally important. And at least for me, they've become more challenging in today's technological world. Technology has made staying in touch really easy, and maybe it's just because I'm really old, but there's no substitute to me for personal interaction, face-to-face interaction. As part of our training program, we spend a fair amount of time discussing the impact technology has on developing and sustaining strong relationships with both clients and with our colleagues. At the firm, it's incumbent upon each of us to build a team of very smart, very responsible lawyers who our clients respect and who they will look to for advice. What's not clear to me is how that happens in this world of technology. As I said, I believe there's no substitute for taking the time to actually going into someone's office and letting them know that you care, asking them how they're doing, telling them personally when they've done a great job, and frankly, telling them in person and talking to them when they're not doing as well as they need to be. It's just critical to get people to know that you care and that you're going to support them. Someone recently came to me and suggested that our training approach, my training approach, was actually very flawed. That if we follow the path I've just outlined, we'd be coddling our associates, and we were never coddled, and we succeeded, so why would we change the model? It's true, we were absolutely never coddled, but I said, I do believe today the world is a different place, and I'm finding that this next generation is focused on work-life balance, whatever that is and whatever it means to them. They want to work hard and they want to succeed, but they really want to do it on their terms, and they want to have a life. And I don't think that attitude is going to change, certainly in the short term. So I believe that it's incumbent upon us to work with them to create the appropriate balance. Laura mentioned it this morning. It is important to have outside interests. I think it makes us all better and better at what we do. I believe there's no reason that what makes each of us successful cannot be passed on to those that we work with through a strong mentor-mentee relationship, recognizing that the people we're trying to help may have a different approach to their careers than we do. In addition, as I said, developing relationships for my colleagues, in addition to developing strong relationships with my colleagues, I had great relationships with my clients, and I think that's really critical. The best bit of advice I got as a young associate came at a moment of utter frustration. I had been working on a deal for a long time. I was in the trenches, and there was a big client meeting coming up, and I felt that I should be able to go. Absolutely. I approached the senior partner, and I made this incredibly compelling case, and he turned to me and he said, no, not so much. He said, Peggy, you are doing great work, but your job is to become the best friend of your contemporaries at our client. I, of course, was not thrilled with that, and frankly, I'm not even sure back then I fully understood what he was talking about. However, over time, it dawned on me that if I could develop a close personal relationship with my clients and really get to know them, get to understand what their needs were, what their concerns were, what was keeping them up at night, and always make sure they looked smart in front of their management, that we would have a great relationship. It would survive the test of time, and ultimately we could become friends. It certainly didn't happen overnight. It took a lot of extra time to do, but for me, the effort was really rewarding. My clients at that point, who were young people in legal departments or in the finance group, we really grew up in the business together. We became great friends. We had many successes together, but we also made a number of mistakes. And what I found was that because we knew each other well, because we respected each other well, when we made a mistake, I could pick up the phone and call and say, look, I am really sorry. We've made a mistake, and this is how we're going to correct it. And as we were talking this morning, 9 times out of 10, the answer was, thank you for letting me know. Don't worry, how can we help? How can we get this done together to make sure that we get back on the right path? Even though most of them are now retired, I continue to hear from them regularly. Many of them have moved on to board seats in public companies, and what's nice is they still think of me and call with business. It also turned out that a couple of my best mentors were in fact not my colleagues, but were general counsels from the clients that I worked with. They taught me the world from their perspective. They helped me understand how to look at issues from their seat at the corporate table. And they helped me understand risk in their world. And that was really an invaluable lesson for me. Those relationships developed from spending an enormous amount of time together. We sat in conference rooms for what seemed like months negotiating deals. In those days, you'd go to the printers. I don't think we do that anymore, and we'd spend endless time there. With technology today, I understand that kids don't go to the printers anymore. And honestly, I'm not entirely sure how those relationships are going to develop. That's not to say they won't. It's just I'm not sure how you do it in the world that we're living in. In fact, a young partner came to me recently, and he was so proud of himself. He had just finished a really big deal, a really public deal, and he said, you know, and I never met the client. And I thought to myself, are you kidding me? How does that work? I'm confident that the kinds of relationships I developed contributed to my success. What I don't have the answer for, and I'm struggling to figure it out so we can train people, is how we're going to achieve it in today's technological world. Let me take a moment and talk about the third factor, which is risk-taking, and we talked again a little bit about it this morning. As I said, I was an associate at a time when work and responsibility were thrown at us, and that's not really the current environment anymore. In today's world, I believe that to make your mark, you have to take more responsibility for your own development. You have to be willing to seek challenges, and when they're offered to you, you have to be willing to step up and take them. Now, you always hear that as lawyers, we don't like to take risks. And for a person who's been in the same job for 33 years, I can attest to the fact that I'm not a big risk taker myself. It's certainly safer, and it's a lot less stressful. But that being said, it's important to develop the ability to know which risks to take, and as I said, to go ahead and take them. I'm one of the people that do believe men do it better, and they do it more. I don't know why that is necessarily, but I think they do. And if I'm right, I think we have to figure out how to change our appetite and our approach to taking risk and accepting responsibility. I've found that if you take a risk and fail, it's humiliating, it's awful. But if you can get beyond the emotional aspect of it and step back, I can guarantee you're gonna learn something for the next time. For the next time. If you take the risk and you succeed, it's a terrific feeling, and you've learned something as well. Of course, if you don't take the risk, you're really never gonna know what you could have achieved, and that can't possibly be good for anybody's development. And the last point I want to make is really that I think it's critical never to lose your sense of humor. I believe that you cannot take yourself and what you do too seriously. You have to be able to step back and laugh. You have to be able to step back and laugh at yourself. And I know if you do, it will relieve a lot of tension that's generally in the room. And frankly, it's going to make you more human to the people that are around you. So let me end where I began, on a personal note. I had my career very much at the expense of my personal life. As a young lawyer, I worked all the time. I did it consciously because, as I said, I loved what I was doing. And at some point, my personal life and my work life coincided. My friends were the people I worked with. So I know this sounds strange, but on Saturday or Sunday, if I had nothing to do, I'd wander into the office because all my friends were there. And we'd go to lunch, we'd go to dinner, we'd go to the movies. I loved it, and it was great. That being said, although my choice was my own, today when I mentor young women, it's not a path I necessarily recommend. Today, I believe on reflection that work-life balance is important. When I was an associate, we never asked whether we could have a night or a weekend off because it was inappropriate. Today, I believe that attitude is changing. I believe it's changing because there are more of us around. There are more senior women who are married with children and who understand the importance of family. I think we're also in a better position today to stand up for ourselves and stand up for the women behind us. I also believe that it's impossible to do it all. As I was beginning my career, we believed that women could do it all. In fact, I believe we were expected to do it all. And I know that we've gotten smarter over time, and I've come to realize that it's completely unrealistic, at least if you're going to try and do it all well. That being said, I do find work-life balance a challenge. It is not easy to do. And I'm often asked whether I would do the same thing today, whether I would forego my personal life for my professional life. And hindsight's an interesting thing. I look back and I say, yeah, you know, I probably would. I loved it. I learned a lot. I made great friends. But let me leave you all with a couple of thoughts. I believe the world has changed quite a bit in the 30-plus years that I've been doing this. The fact that we're having this conference is evidence of that. The fact that we talk about the importance of mentoring women, of promoting and sponsoring women, and increasing and seeing an increase in the percentage of women on boards is also an indication of change. The fact that there are a number of women who are now CEOs of public companies, including one of our own, represents huge change. Could it be easier? Yes, of course, it could be much easier. Could there be more of work-life balance? Yes, of course. But carrying the torch further is going to be up to each of us. Our willingness to invest the time to support other women, to mentor, promote, and sponsor other women is going to be what's going to make the difference. I believe that it is incumbent upon each of us to make the way for those that come after us a bit easier. And I believe that if we do that, we will all truly be successful. So thank you for having me today. I'm happy to take questions if there are any. Please.
I just had a quick thing. You just want to frown. I guess from a student perspective, the things you were saying were very encouraging, especially sort of having a new approach to training younger associates and, you know, understanding that technology changes things. So that was encouraging to hear. But I know something that I look at when I'm looking at firms that I would want to work for, or sort of facially what the firm looks like. And so I was just wondering if your firm has like a women's initiative or anything like that that you might be able to speak to.
Sure. The answer is yes. For many years at the partner level, we recognize the importance of the need to support each other as partners. So we've had for many, many years an annual Women Partners meeting. It's only been recently, in the last couple of years, that we have created a formal initiative for all of our women lawyers, not just the partners. We recognize that we spend an enormous amount of time and an enormous amount of capital bringing in women from law schools, making sure that our firm, the face of our firm, looks like everyone else, but that we were losing them. And so it really was not a perfect model. We've put together a committee. It's run by two very senior women, but the committee itself is a group of younger female partners. Women not like me, but women who actually have personal lives. They're married, they have kids. And the goal of it really is to make sure that we are training and supporting and developing our women, that they have a place to go when they have problems, and a place that's comfortable for them to talk about those issues and figure out how to succeed. So.
There are no men on that committee?
I don't believe there are.
Why is that?
I can't answer that. I actually wasn't responsible for it. But I think our feeling is, certainly at the partner level, that there's a uniqueness about creating a safe environment for women to really talk about their concerns. And once those concerns are articulated and really figured out, you know, they immediately go to our policy committee and our managing partner. But my sense is that's really why the committee was comprised the way it was. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that the law firm model is changing. How is that model changing, and how will it impact the development and success of women lawyers?
How's the model changing? What we're seeing, and I don't think it's going to come as a big surprise, is that in the recent economic downturn, you have to do more with a lot less. So we've been bringing in our first-year classes are much smaller. We are, because the workload is not the way it was when I was young, we're finding that the training, the day-to-day training of young associates is not the same. They don't get the same exposure and experience that I did. So we've put in a very large training program for our first-year associates when they show up. We sort of give them a mini MBA program, and then we put them in teams, and they actually negotiate deals which are hypothetical, and they do hypothetical litigations. So that's from the law firm perspective. I think from the business model, it's a big change. In the old days, because our clients would come to us with bet the company issues, and because they didn't have in-house staffs that were really sophisticated enough, and I don't mean that in a negative way, it's just sort of a factual statement, to handle those types of things, they came to us, and they would pay whatever it cost to get it done. That is absolutely not the case anymore, and we are feeling tremendous pressure to come up with non-standard fee arrangements. And as you know, the way you feed all the people that work at the firm is through your billing rates. And so when you're getting, pressures to do discounts, or when you're getting flat fees, you have to think hard about it. You have to balance that with the relationship. And what we're seeing, and again, I don't know how much of it is technology or how much of it is economic times, but it is clear that what we do has been commoditized, and it's clear that that big companies that come to us really are spreading that work around, and they're a little less interested in the relationship. They're far more interested in what they're going to pay. So that's sort of a beginning of how the model is changing. And I think we as a firm are going to have to think strong and hard about what we look like over the next 5-10 years.
Well, Peggy, thank you again for
Sure.
sharing your insights.
My pleasure.
And